Guys, what's going on? Thanks for checking into the channel. My name is Evi Shafran. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I want to talk to you guys about how you can actually make 10 to 12% return on your investment. Does that sound crazy to you? Well, it's actually interesting because the whole movement of rates has actually created a better opportunity for people like you and I who want to invest our money in real estate but don't want to actually own the real estate. We simply want to act as the bank in the transaction. Is it starting to make sense to you? You are the lender, okay? And now, mind you, there are different tiers that you can take in lending money to people for a piece of real estate, meaning that the lowest risk factor lies when you're in first position. So what does that mean? When you actually go to the bank and you request a loan, right, for any piece of real estate, the loan typically from an institutional bank like, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, is always in first position unless you're getting a home equity line of credit, and that's in second position. It's starting to make more sense now, right? So the first loan is always the primary loan that you have against the real estate, which is what we are discussing over here today. Now, because it's a private loan, it typically involves qualifying the equity, all right, or the asset itself versus the individual. Of course, you want to take a look at the individual, but you're primarily focused on the asset. So that's why you don't want to give more than about 60 to 70% of what the property is worth, because you don't want to take a really big risk just in case there's a default on the property, all right? So I do want to discuss the positives, I do want to discuss the negatives. So let's kick off with that, all right? So let's talk about the positives. You are in a priority position. You're the first lien holder on the property. There is an opportunity to lend in second, third, even fourth position. We're not gonna discuss that today. You're gonna be in priority position, meaning that any other liens are secondary to yours. So if there's a case of default, you're actually the first person to collect your money, all right? So that's pretty great. Your money is fairly secure as long as you're able to give a loan at, like I said, 60 to 70%, because that basically means that there's still 30 to 40% equity in the property. Let's use an example, all right? Let's say somebody wanted to buy a $100,000 piece of property, okay? And they approach you and they say, hey, could I get a loan from you? And you give them $60,000. That means that there's $40,000 in the property. And should they default for any reason, you simply can go through the process just like any other bank, foreclose on the property. The property will sell in public sale and public auction, right? And then whatever you're owed, you'll be paid. And if there's any other money that is the residual difference, that money will go to the borrower. So that's the first line item. I think that puts you in a really good position as a lender, as long as you control your loan to value, all right? And also, I think it's pretty low risk when you approach it that way. Now, the other thing which I really love is the fact that it's a steady stream of income. Typically speaking, these type of loans are, designed for 12 to 24 months. So it's a fairly short period of time. The reason these loans are in existence in the first place, they're typically designed for business purposes. So it's not typically somebody who's gonna buy their primary residence and live there. It's an investor who wants to buy a property to fix and flip because they're gonna realize a profit. Or maybe they want to buy a property that needs a lot of work, and guess what? The bank is just not going to finance it because it's not habitable, okay? So they may have a plan in place that they could share with you as to how much money they want to inject into the property, and you guys can work together on that, meaning that you may lend them X amount of money today, and you might put a little bit of money aside as they progress in their work, so the piece of property is going to be worth more money through the life of the construction. There is a great stream of income coming to you every single month. And when you consider, as an example, putting your money in the bank, even today, where interest rates are much higher, a really lucrative rate of return would probably be somewhere around 4.5% to 5%. Imagine getting 10 to 12%. It makes a huge difference, right? So stream of income, and it typically balloons after 12 to 24 months, depending on what you agreed upon. And then typically if somebody needs the money for a longer period of time, then they can actually pay you an extension fee, which is really great, all right? So you could actually charge them another percent of the money for, say, another 6 months or so. So that's your second point right there. And the third point is you're always secured by the collateral, meaning that when you, as an example, get a credit card from the bank, right? It's an unsecured loan. So what does that mean? There is no security other but your own personal guarantee. So yeah, they could put a lien on you personally, and if you own other assets, all that could get tricky. But right here, there's a lien against a piece of property. So if somebody doesn't pay you, you have a lien against the property. And as the lender, if you're not paid, again, you can go through the foreclosure process and get your money out, all right? So those are the positives. Now let's go through some of the negatives. Here we go. Okay, so basically when you give your money, you should only be a credited investor, meaning you're not using more than 10% of your net worth to lend out, or the money that you actually have available to be able to do these kind of investments. Well, hopefully you're a credited investor doing this and you're not spending more than 10% of your money, which means that you have plenty of money left over, all right? That's number one. Number two is the market volatility. We cannot control that, right? Let me give you this example. Let's say that you lend your money on a property for $100,000 and you give them money for, say, 24 months. Well, in 24 months, if the property is worth $80,000, that's why it's important to not lend more than 60 to 70%, like I was telling you, because you always want to have equity in the property. If, God forbid, the property goes down to, say, $80,000, which would be a massive move in the market, that's 20%, and you lend them, as an example, 70%, you only have $10,000 in equity, and now they're in default. Maybe a little tricky of a situation because it's going to eat up your reserve or your equity fairly quickly, all right? So that's something we don't want to get into. Number three, of course, there's always, segue default of risk. If somebody is going to default on the loan, then you do got to go through, just like any other lender, through the foreclosure process where you give them a notice of default, meaning that they have to come up with payment in full. And if they don't, then you go ahead and you move forward with a trustee sale, you issue a notice of sale, and then the property goes and sells in public auction, all right? There is actually some positives in that arena, believe it or not, because the second they default, the interest rate goes from 10 or 12%, remember we're talking about that, to the default rate, which is typically 5 or even 10% higher. So now, that whole time they're not paying you, as long as there's equity in the property, they now owe you a lot more money than the actual amount of money that you're charging them every single month. So sometimes, believe it or not, and in some situations, that could actually be a positive and not a negative. Now, the last thing is, of course, diversification of investment, right? You always want to diversify your investments. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, especially not with only one investor. So if you were to do this, I would suggest, from just working with a lot of investors, to potentially use, no more than 10% of, the funds that you have. And it's always good to invest in small chunks versus really big chunks. As an example, I was talking to these two investors, and they're controlling a fund of millions of dollars. And the guy was telling me, he goes, listen, Zevi, I always prefer to do 3, 4, 500,000 versus to do one investment on a $10 million house, and even give them 50%, that's $5 million. That's a lot of money. And if something goes wrong, we don't want to be caught up in that scenario. So that's it for you guys. Once you do write your agreement, you are the bank. So that's why the return is in fact guaranteed for as long as you're holding that note. And if like I said, you fall into default, then it could pop up by 5 or 10%, but that's not where we want to go as lenders. We always want to be in a position where we're just simply collecting the monthly payments every single month. We do not and are not interested in the real estate itself, and we only want to be able to help our borrowers. So with that segue, I am actually composing a list, all right? And it doesn't actually mean that you commit to anything by any means. When these opportunities come about, we will actually reach out to the list of investors and ask if anyone in fact is interested in this particular deal, whatever it may be. So if that's something that sparks your interest, you're an accredited investor and you want to partake in an investment in real estate where you can lend some money as the lender and make 10 to 12% on your money, there's going to be an email address in the description below. It's going to be info@loanbrook.com. Just shoot us an email. Let me know that, hey, I might be interested in this. Put me on your list, and that's about it. If an opportunity comes about, we will, in fact, let you know about it. Right? If you have any questions about it, please drop them in the comments below. As always, appreciate you. Thank you for watching this, and look forward to catching you on the next video. Take care.